On today's video, I speak to Vanessa Bobb. Vanessa is a mother with autistic children and is the founder of A Second Voice, which helps and supports autistic families get the support and awareness that they need. I have worked with Vanessa a lot and I can honestly say she is one of the most inspirational and hardest working people I have met. We speak about what the diagnosis stage was like for her, diversity within the autism community, and how she would explain autism to a neurotypical person. Hey guys, and welcome to another special episode of the Autism Connection Season 2 on MaxiAspie. And today I've got a woman that I work very closely with. She's amazing with the amount of work that she does around autism and also being a parent of autistic child. Please give it up and thank you for chatting to me. Thank you for coming on, Venessa Bobb. So Vanessa, obviously thank you for coming on to the Autism Connection Series 2. Obviously a great guest to have, and I'm always starting off with this question on the series, which is, what is your connection with autism?
My connection to autism is my son Nathaniel, who was diagnosed with autism and ADHD in 2008, and my youngest was diagnosed with autism, ADHD and epilepsy between 2017 and 2018. Obviously, because of the journey I had with my son, I decided to set up a second voice due to the challenges I was having within my local borough. And then another connection is being part of the Lambeth Autism Group, which is part of one of the branches for the National Autistic Society.
As I always say, Vanessa, if it wasn't for you, a lot of my voice wouldn't be heard as well. And I'm always really privileged to be able to work with you with anything. You know, I always remember the first day that we met, I was heckled up in the Houses of Parliament, and you were the first person to sort of come in and stand up for me, and that was sort of when really I think our sort of relationship, you know, kicked off. Yeah, and I'm always thankful to you for that. And obviously I think that the main reason I want to do the interview with you, because I don't think you get a lot of recognition that you deserve, and you know, hopefully people that see this will actually see the person that's behind a lot of it as well. How did you find, you know, the diagnosis stage then for Nathaniel, and also, I suppose, getting the support from the schools and government? And also, I know Nathaniel's kind of going on, later in life, you know, getting to that age now where he's leaving school and stuff. And how have you found the support from the government now and getting him into work?
I would say before Nathaniel was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, it was a nightmare. And I still think, even though in 2021, I don't see there's really been any changes as such. It's not to say that the service is not there. I think there's just a lack of everything when it comes to just asking for help. I would say the diagnosis procedure was very straightforward. It was more based where before Nathaniel was in nursery, I wouldn't have said I would have noticed anything. I just noticed he was a very quiet child. People said that he was very intelligent, very quick learner, but I could say he was nonverbal, limited speech, but he never had that assessment when it came to the speech and language therapist. So for me, looking back, there was lots of gaps why he slipped through the network. His developmental stages, again, was where everybody would tell me, oh, it's just because it's a boy thing. Boys take longer to develop. That's all I was told. Once he got the diagnosis in April 2008, and I always remember it because a couple of weeks before that, in an independent school that I used to go to in Croydon, and they no longer exist. And I'm so glad, because that's where I would say a lot of the problems started as well, because he jumped on a girl's back. They wanted to exclude him. He actually got excluded. That information is nowhere in his files. And it was like, no matter what I was asking people for help, it was my parenting skills. So everything from 2008 to 2021, I can hear lots of stories, regardless if it's in the Black community, the white community, the Asian community. What I'm seeing is the same. I see history repeating itself, where a parent would ask for help, and what ends up happening, they're looking at us. What are you doing at home? So when it comes to asking for help, I've had to look for outside source. I've had to look at independent organizations. And the organization that helped me in the early days was Mark Brown, who's now Dr. Mark Brown for Special Help for Special Needs. He was a great input, because through him and the church that I attended, they said, why don't you set up a support group? And I think through me setting up a second voice in the early days, I would never ever have thought that I would be where I'm doing now, because I like to talk for England, as I've been told, but to be in front of a camera, I felt very uncomfortable. I had to learn to slow down when I'm talking, because I was told that I confuse people. I look at my reports, and how I was described was that I was unapproachable, I'm mentally ill, I'm suicidal thoughts, you name it, that's what's in my files. And I'm not scared to speak it, because 2021, because we were talking about COVID, there's so many families right now who are saying we need help. And when they tell me what is happening, I read their files, I feel like I'm reading my story. So the question when you ask, what help? I think without the National Autism Society, no matter how much people may turn around and say they've not done nothing for them, I would say without the National Autism Society, I don't think I would never ever known about research autism in the early days, because they had these early bird sessions where it was only like £10, or while the tickets may have been like, was it £150, £200, and the first 100 people joined. I made sure that I was there sending my emails in, because I wanted to know so much about autism. But one thing that was lacking was the cultural perspective. So when we talk about race, and from my perspective was, and I'll say it as it is, when somebody says my child is autistic, you'll find as the parent, you just want to know how you can support your child. You got some people who try and fix autism. You can't fix autism. And I used to hear people tell me about cure, recovery, sunrise, detox, get rid of the mercury. I used to get all this at me, and a lot of people got offended when I said, no, I just want to have a solution. I want to know how I can support my son, because his needs will never be met. But once I started connecting with autistic people, and I think the first person that if I can remember that spoke for me as an autistic person was Laurie Morgan. And then I had Lynn Moxon. Then I invited Alex Rowe. There was Julie Daunt for PDA, came and spoke from her lived experience. I just remembered I was just inviting so many autistic people to come and speak, to the point one day somebody said to me, why are you always bringing in white speakers? Where's the Black speakers? And that's where I started getting attacked, telling me that, I'm not our community. I actually said, you Google search autism, you'll find that it's very hard to get anybody that is Black. And the person that I did know of at the time was Stephen Wiltshire, which obviously knows. But overall, everything that you see me done is being based off the support of, then there was Alicia, and she's based in Sheffield. And I remember that's how we actually started first, really, where trying to target the Black community, it was just me and her, nobody else would come forward. And we just formed, I think it was Proud Parents of Autistic Children. But she took time out, she's doing her own thing, and she's doing some great stuff. But for me, I still felt I was in the mud, no matter where I went, no matter what I did, Max. I was just told the services are not there. And that's where we are now. I'm still hearing the same thing. And with my son now in sixth form, and now he's back in the community because he was in a residential for 6 years, it was a good choice. I didn't want to do it because I was told that if he is put with autistic children that are severely autistic, even though I don't even like that word either, my son would regress. What my son proved to everybody, he progressed. But the only thing what happened as he got older, he realized that, as he said, he wasn't with other autistic young people that were like him, meaning that, you know, they weren't interested in the things that he was doing. They weren't, they were more, as I said, my son was, you could say, he felt like, from my perspective, I describe my son, he would say, so we talk about the puzzle. I use a puzzle as an example, and this is what my son has said. He doesn't feel he fits in nowhere. He says that, yes, he's autistic, he's black autistic, but when he's in the white community and you go in some areas, that, you know, you can't talk about race because as you can see what's happened with the news, why are you bringing race into it? But for my son, when he looks around, color has never been an issue. But when you go into an area where one time, as he said, he's walking with his white key worker, and people looked at him, he didn't care. But sometimes it's the stares of like, who's that person walking with my son? So it was suggested that my son should get a positive key black male role model. But the challenges that we had, it was skilled to understand his autism, because you could get anybody to come and work with an autistic person. And if you don't understand autism, what you're doing, you're adding to the problem. And I found that's what was happening with my son. I'll let people stay with my son, then my son would come home and he would be more confused about people saying to him, you're not autistic, there's nothing wrong with you. And then that's when he'll come home saying, I'm not autistic. He didn't want to be autistic because of the stigma or how people were telling him he looked normal. And again, that word normal, what is normal? So yeah, so my life has been trying to protect my children from everybody. And then we look at my daughters as late diagnosed, the youngest one who's got the diagnosis, but the older one hasn't. I would say it's a different energy I've got to put to that, because the system is still fighting to understand when they talk about girls masking. But imagine when you've got 2 black autistic or 1 undiagnosed, and the challenges I'm facing when it comes to communities not understanding autism because they just see, as they say, feisty or very controlling young black girls, when no, it's not. It's because they've been misunderstood, left undiagnosed for years. And that's for any woman who's had a diagnosis late, to see the challenges where exploitation, manipulation, and being told there's nothing wrong with them. And then when you look at my older one who, you know, left at 14, came back at 16, pregnant, not knowing she was 7 months when I finally found out, it just shows how society still miss out the autistic voice. No matter what they say, autistic communities, no matter what communities they come from, they are being ignored.
I suppose one other question I had then, because I think you're dead right. Like, one of the things that I look back at the Autism Connections last year was, of all my guests, they were all white, and I looked back and I thought, oh my God, like I've not done that intentionally at all. But I looked back and I thought, oh my God, like, you know, why is that sort of thing? You know, why do you feel that is as well? I mean, the cultures, do you think are dissimilar? Do you think doctors just don't want to give the black people the diagnosis over the white people? And also, with diagnosis statistics, do you know how many black people get diagnosed with autism?
Max, listen to this. If they say 1 in 4 boys are autistic, you know that's been done on the middle class white young person. That doesn't even include the woman or a young girl. Then when we talk about the black perspective, I remember I actually asked my local borough a couple of years ago. I even wrote to I think at the time QC Kenneth Clark, and I asked him the question: how many black boys? First of all, it was how many boys are in prison, young are in prison. Then I broke it down and said, how many are black that are in prison? Because of my experiences, that one of my cousins got murdered in 2008, and we've got to be very realistic. When he was murdered, I remember my son, that's the year he got diagnosed, and I just remembered how my son had no understanding, laughing at the graveside. And that's when I turned around, and when I was trying to ask social services, I was going to NHS, I was going to family members, everywhere I went, and all I was told is autism doesn't affect the Black community. This is 2008. Then I did my research, and then I found out about the refrigerator mother. So at that time, they didn't, if anybody decides to Google search it, when they saw the clips, they sort of looked at it as a white condition. They didn't see it as for Black people. So from there, I took it on myself. As I said, it took me years, even I was fighting the local authorities, and I have to be a bit sort of careful. So what I've learned over the years is autism is only now, as people keep saying, is more on the forefront to an extent. But when you speak to a lot of professionals, and I will say as it is, I'm at the Cassandra Centre now, and the reason why I'm here is that this was my safe space because nobody understood me. No one understood my children. And it's only to the CEO, because Jennifer McDermott, her daughter was murdered over 20 years ago. And it took her to say to me is that in probation, when she saw in the reports ADHD, autism, or PDA, it's just written. So a lot of them don't know what they just write it, and it's just like this copy paste, as I say in social services, copy paste. So they don't even know sometimes what they are copy pasting. But it's through Jennifer where she invited me to come to do workshops. So when you always see me talk about the Cassandra Centre, there's a reason behind it, because through Cassandra Centre, what they did, they listened to me. Nobody else listened to me. The year when my daughter left home, I was broken. I was hurt. So when people saw me on Facebook, I was told I was crazy, I'm mentally ill. And what Jennifer said to me was, until you help yourself, you can't help nobody. So if people go back on my history on Facebook, they'll see how I was seen as very angry. I'll come out with certain, like, it's like I've got a problem with people. No, I had problems with the system. Because what the system were doing was they weren't even accepting what autism was. But then when I took up a second voice and I was going through the pain, because my daughter left in 2015, I didn't really talk about it. So people thought I only had 2 children, but I actually had 3. But when my daughter came back home in 2017, and obviously to deliver my grandson at home, did I see the challenges I faced when working with organizations where I am seen as dysfunctional, I'm seen as the bad parent. But then when people see me, people at one time didn't even know that I was Black. Because of what they do, people go somewhere, so I say, oh, we're working with a second voice. Really? Well, I'm a second voice. So where did you get that from? People are actually using my name. So when you see me become I'm very direct now. And I said to somebody, if an autistic person can be so direct, I've learned now to be more direct, but I've always been a direct person. But the way I was always seen is that I'm aggressive. What, because I'm Black? No, I've got an opinion based on my own experiences because my rights was taken away from me from my children. And I've seen so many women from all walks of life that have come to me and said, social services came to my house, and I found that in the end, what they did, instead of them listening to me, they started listening to our autistic young person. And you've got to remember, with autistic people, Max, and the way when you deliver your presentations, I have to laugh because it reminds me of how my son was, and many times. And what I notice is that why it's so important to hear the young autistic voice, or to hear autistic young people when they're at Parliament. So like when you got heckled, I got why the other person heckled you. He was autistic as well. But his journey was very different. What people don't understand is, even though they say autism, when you meet one autistic person, you only met one, but it's like a snowflake. But the problem with how society continue to talk about autism, and let's say in COVID, they realize when they say you can't wear the face, you've got to wear the face mask, you've got to do this. Actually, some autistic people are going to listen to the rules. But what about those who may have PDA? Or they will have ODD. Does it make sense? So when they've got all these overlayers, spiky profiles, and society just don't even accept autism, can you imagine them saying, okay, what about PDA? What is that now? So what has happened to my family, and then adding on the race perspective, I've had double layers of discrimination, ism. I say isms because it's not just racism, because within our community there's that colorism? Because with my own community have been discriminated to me, or conscious bias, because when I say to them my son is autistic, what, really? What? That people don't get that. And then when I see other children coming into the Cassandra Centre, because it's a very small centre, it's not a centre in the sense that it's lots of children, it's very small. I could look at a child, because the place is working with women who've gone through domestic abuse or through trauma. And when the child comes in, I could look at the child, and I'm not saying they've got autism, because we've got to be careful that some children have got fetal alcoholic syndrome disorder. So if you're trying to work with your child with the therapies and the support of an autistic child or ADHD, and the child is still not improving, you may have to look at other areas. And I think sometimes people look at autism as, just because a child's got a behavior doesn't always mean it's autism. It could be that the child has had childhood traumas, and what has happened is in a certain way has triggered certain behaviors that look like autism. And I think that is what I've learned, talk to professionals. So I've learned now that I'm not going to be angry with professionals now. What I can say is professionals need to learn that they need to listen to autistic people. They need to be educated about autism. Then, because of the cultural perspective, and it's important, they need to understand. When we talk about culture, as I've always said, there's 2,000 African languages and there's 2,300 Asian languages. I can probably only count about 5 or 6 African languages, and probably in the Asian community. So we have to be very careful when we talk about, and I don't use the word BAME, I say African, Caribbean, Black or Asian or minority ethnic community or Jew heritage community, because at the end of the day, I am not a BAME mum, I'm a Black mum. But then, as my daughter says, my parents are from Guyana and they're from Aruba. But people look at me and think that they'll say, all right, we'll put you with the African family. I don't understand African. Do you understand what I'm saying? The food is different, the culture is different, the upbringing may be different. So again, don't judge what you see, learn to ask questions. And that's what I had to learn to do. And I learned that by, one, being with the National Autism Society, attending the APPGAs. If I never attended these events, I would have been able to do the things that I do. But again, I get sort of knocked back because I don't want to be in the spotlight. I prefer to be in the background, why I try to encourage autistic people to have the voice, because I've seen, Max, how you inspired my son when my son came to, it was his first time he ever came to the House of Commons with me. And I remember I sat there, it was one of the inquiries for the 10-year 10-year strategy. And I remember my son's head was down, but when he heard you, and I thought it was James, I think it was James, and then sitting next to me was the director or writer for was it the A? I forgot again. Remember the short film, the short series?
Oh, the A word. The A word.
The A word, that's it. And I remember the director was sitting next to me, and my son just sat up, and all of a sudden, it was like, when he heard you speak, that just changed the whole dimension of my son. And I think that's when my son realised there was nothing wrong being autistic.
No, and that's it. There isn't. But it's like the whole way that we learn and the whole way that we're taught things sometimes. You know, when my mum was trying to get my diagnosis, I had a teacher that turned around and just said, no, your son's not autistic. He's just naughty. Like, that was the reply. And I'll tell you what, just quickly, because I've got it, I'll show you something really quick. You'll laugh. So the other day I decided that I would go and sort my paperwork out, and I stumbled across, and this is like literally a bit of it, but this is like the file that my mum had just to get diagnosis.
Wow.
And I've still got it. Well, she's still got it, she still kept it, but it's just letters and letters and letters and all of it just to get, you know, a diagnosis to say, can someone help my child? Because we need that help, we need that support. So I suppose that leads me on to my next question as well. What do you think the biggest challenges around autism are? And, you know, do you also get frustrated by the lack of support? And if so, by whom the most? So whether that's schools or government.
Ask the first question again, because sensory overload, getting late.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I should think about that. What do you think the biggest challenges are around autism?
Okay, I think the biggest challenge around autism is the lack of provision, in a sense of, if the first 5 years of a child's life is like, that their brain is like a sponge, and you see a child doesn't act all right like its other peers, why not put something in place straight away? It doesn't, reasonable adjustment can be free. Because remember, when they're young and you notice they don't do something accordingly, like, with, for instance, if a child is acting inappropriately, or they're non-verbal, or you notice they don't like food, it is about starting back from basic. To me, it's just go and ask somebody. If the Senko teacher doesn't understand, make sure that in that school they're connecting to an organization that works with autistic people. I think that's my biggest challenge. My biggest challenge, me looking at my daughter 10 years later, I've been asked now by social services now, why wasn't my daughters diagnosed when they were younger? Now, that is what I was fighting from day one, not for autism, more about, can somebody just see why they're acting a bit differently when it was about their learning? They struggled with attaining the information, or processing information in a different way. So my biggest challenge is not being understood. That's what it is, not being understood. That's the biggest challenge for any parent. It's not being understood and not being listened to. And then when you do get that information, even if you get the diagnosis, doesn't mean that it's gonna happen overnight, because you're still now fighting to make sure that if your child is in a school that's not meeting your child's needs, then it's now, where do where do they go? Because it's very costly, to support an autistic person. But the way I look at it, if early intervention was done in the beginning, when they notice certain ticking the boxes, like when they do the, the milestones, the little red book, then maybe they could have nipped it in the bud. But because they delay, then we have a crisis. And by then, the services is not even there, or it's in another borough. And then you get picked, and that's what the issue I find.
It's almost like we need a system where as soon as you're born, you're just presumed to have everything, and literally everything should be ticked off. Just like when you're born, you're checked if you've got this or you've got that, or, I think the educational system would just be so much better if everyone's just presumed to have everything, and then throughout their school life they go, no, don't think he's got this, don't think he's got that, don't think she's got this, don't think she's got that. And then when they get to the one where they think, it's like, actually, we're going to leave that ticked for now, because that way, as you say, you'd have that early that early intervention, because every child would have it, and it's not going to do any harm to the child, because all of these are good practices that would help anybody, let alone someone with autism.
Yeah.
Like how we ask questions, like slowing our information down, all of that would be beneficial. But I think you're right, it's being understood. And I always say the most unutilized resource out there, not due to them, but just due to people not, I suppose, not wanting to ask or not just utilizing them correctly, but our parents.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I always remember, I think I told you, I saw a Twitter status where someone said, we're having this big event. We'd like to invite all professionals. Please join this webinar. And a parent put, can parents join? And they put, no, only experts only. And I'm thinking, of all the people, I mean, Vanessa, out of all the people in the world, you're going to understand Nathaniel's condition more than anybody else.
That's right.
It's a given, because you're so interested at the end of the day. Any decision you make is going to be for the best for Nathaniel. As teachers, professionals, doctors, they've got to see 50 to 100 people a day, and they've got to make good decisions. And you can see why people get lost through the system. I think you're right. Do you feel frustrated by the lack of support? And if so, who do you feel most frustrated with, whether that's school or government or employment?
I feel who disappoints me the most I'm going to say in the order. I would say, all right, you get the diagnosis. Some parents are just given a leaflet. Okay. I would say it starts with the Senko, because if the child is in a, so we're talking about primary, let's talk about primary first. The child gets a diagnosis in primary school. As parents, we've got to reshuffle our life. We've got to learn to adapt. But then when we put them into the school or the nursery, or even college, all right, talk about college, then they have to, it's like they don't want to make the changes because it's tapping into their budget. Then when you look at, if you're an adult now who's been late diagnosed, it's trying to go to the job center, it's trying to go to your GP, it's trying to tell your friends or your family, I've got autism. Or if they unable to because we're talking about autistic people that are able to walk outside independently. I think people need to understand there's some autistic people that are out there that do need carers. And I feel that in COVID, as I said again, my frustration when we talk about it from that perspective, I blame now the government, because the National Autism Society, the All Parliamentary Advisory Group, and all the other charities out there who've been pushing about the hidden voices out there who need to be included. NHS England, obviously if we're in England, and obviously all the other Wales, Ireland and Scotland, you know, the Health Watch, the education systems, it's everybody. When that person says, I have got autism, what are they going to do to help that individual if they're not helping that individual? So my frustration is, it's at the top, but then I think once that child gets the diagnosis and they go to school, my child has got now a diagnosis. Are you going to help that child? Is social services going to come in, and when that child is there kicking and biting, and they're going to say, oh, it's your parenting skills, when, and that's my frustration. It's everybody, but it's when your child goes to school and the system is telling you, no, it's your parenting skills. That is my biggest frustration.
I've always felt, you know, if we can't get it right at a primary school level, then it just gradually gets
Gets
worse
worse.
and worse.
Yeah, it's
Um,
been, yeah.
yeah, I completely agree. And then it's the same as when you go to college. Yeah, because just say that education side has been a write-off, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
go to college to study what you want to do, and then the college lets you down as well,
And a
because
university.
and the university. And then when you go out into work, if you're even lucky to get a job, because as we know, there's only 16% of people with autism in full-time work.
That's
So
right.
if you get a job, you're lucky. And then from that point, you could be one of the percentage that ain't going to get full-time work, and then you get government cut your pip money, you
Mm-hmm.
know, not want to send carers out to help those who really need it. And
That's right.
you just look at the pandemic. I mean, I believe double the amount of people with conditions died last year.
They did.
I know they were dealing with a pandemic, but one, it should never have been like the high, like exclusion should never have been at the highest in the first place for autistic people.
Yeah.
16% should never have been 16% in the first place. And yeah, look, I'm getting frustrated now. Look at me.
No, you know what? Like Taryn said, if at least once a week on national television or in the paper they have just an area that is for those who have got autism or those who've got additional needs, or even not even additional needs, those who've got specific learning difficulties as well, because the mainstream do still exclude, like I try and say to everybody, when they say that word BAME, the reason why I don't like it, it still excludes. It's still excluding communities. So if you can't even in your newspaper, your local newspaper, the councillors, the MPs, can't even, they talk about, oh, they're doing all this great work for the disabled community, but they're not, but when they get in the newsletters, they're not even making them easy reading. That is going through your letterbox, you know? So it's like on one hand, you're saying you're doing stuff for the community, but then when you get that newsletter and the person may have dyslexia and they can't read, and if they're autistic as well, and they may be blind and they may have autism, they don't, so this is the thing, is that they seem to just put autism in one box, not realizing there's other layers that autistic people have been failed. because some of their needs are not being met, because even their parents may have autism as well and special needs. And there's all these things that people do not respect. And that's what really, again, frustrates me.
No, I think, honestly, I could listen to you all day, because I think we're just always on the same page with it, to be honest. What would you like to tell someone with autism, or a parent or a carer, you know, about autism, and what support and advice would you like to give them?
I think for any parent whose child, especially who's just been diagnosed in COVID, is you're not on your own. There is lots of webinars. I know it's tiring, but just find the time to listen. Find the time to find autistic people that are giving you sound advice, because they are out there. But you got to be careful. My advice is not to give up. You're not on your own. We're in some tough times, but the only time it will get better if you just learn just to listen and talk. If you feel that the school, college, your employer, coach, people out there, sorry, when I mean coach watch, I mean the job centre. If you're applying for a job and you're applying for the PIP, you're applying for the DLA, or you're applying for any help, make sure you get somebody who understands autism. Don't just say you're just going to do it from the eyes of somebody who's looking at it from a mainstream perspective, because it's going to do more damage. So my advice is try and connect with your local offer, your local offer, your send local offer. That's one, with your local, your local borough. Another one is, I'm going to always go back. If you have a problem with your local GP or community centre or the children's centre, go to your health watch, find out who it is, go to your social prescribing, check out the NHS England in regards to learning disabilities and autism. Because at the end of the day, there's so much information that is out there, but if you're not aware of what is out there, because you may have your own challenges because you can't read and write, find somebody that can do it, that you trust, who you feel that are not going to tell you, you should know better, or why didn't you do it at school? Because some people can be very insensitive. Yeah.
I think that's spot on. I suppose the last question would be, what would you like to tell a neurotypical person who has potentially never heard about autism, that has just no knowledge of it? How would you explain it to them, and what would you like to say to them?
Oh dear, I'm going to be nice.
You go for it.
All right. The first thing I would say, if somebody says, again, oh, your son looks normal, your daughter looks normal, my response would be, okay, you go to a foreign country and no manual, and you're told, right, you've got to go there, you've got to go over there, then you've got to go back there, right? And then you've got to come back to me. But you as the person has gone somewhere else, and you've changed your clothes and you've changed your hair, and then you expect that person to remember, please. So I'm saying, be thoughtful, ask questions, but if you don't understand, Google search autism. If you don't want to feel silly, because now you've got a lot of autistic people, very vocal. So if you say something on Facebook or any social media, you will get corrected. So my advice to any non-autistic person, neurotypical person, is seek for information before you decide to help that family. And don't make assumptions, because it's assumptions that has caused mental trauma, broken families, because autism has been denied, because people don't believe what autism is.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better. It's about being open, isn't it? I still have people now, and still have autistic people, will self-diagnose themselves as severely autistic or mildly autistic. And I said to someone the other day, I just think you're autistic, because who are we to measure what autism looks like? People have their perception of autism, as you know, Vanessa. Some people will argue if you can't talk and you need 24/7 care, you're severely autistic. But what they don't remember is you could have somebody who can go out, can get a job, can live, I suppose, a life, you know, that doesn't evolve around 24-hour care, but they could have the sensory
Mhm.
overload, they could have the meltdowns, they could have the anxiety. So in a way, even though they can live their life maybe in a better way, they're dealing with so much
Mhm.
stress, so much anxiety, so much meltdowns. So who am I to say, well, you're mild because you can actually go and get a job and do those things and you don't require 24/7 care. I just
Mm.
think, you know, and as you know, there's so many kids that get turned away, so many parents getting turned away because their kids, quote unquote, not autistic enough.
Well,
And it's,
I'll give you an example. Sorry for cut you. I'll use my youngest daughter as example. I find that my daughter is the one that has had the most abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and everything, mental abuse, because through primary school she was told that she was silly, she was stupid, she's copying her brother. So at home she felt traumatized. At school she was traumatized. Family didn't understand her. I was always told she knows what she's doing. But nobody didn't realize, and I didn't even know, she had epilepsy. So there's times she has the absent seizures. So hers is not where she has the medication. Hers is the benign Rolandic epilepsy. If anybody wants to check it out, she grows out of it when she is 16. Now, as an example with this COVID, no matter how much you're telling a lot of young people to stay at home, but because you've got this social media saying there's no such thing as COVID, my youngest in particular, the other day, meant to be at school, but she wasn't feeling well, but she likes to go out for fresh air. But this time she decided that I got a phone call from the police that she's in Paddington. So imagine, I live in South London. My heart jumped because, and I'm saying this out very openly just to show you, when people say your child knows what they're doing, my daughter's had everything to be, no, she spoke in front of 100 people years ago, speaking about why she doesn't agree with sex education when it's a mixed, boy and girl in the class. But for some reason, I got the phone call. I kept calm, because I thought, what is the point? Because I've been told she knows what she's doing. The police were there. This was at Paddington Station. I went to get her. I had to drop everything. And these are the things that people don't understand, the sort of things that we have to go through with some of our children, especially when they're at the other end, where they're in mainstream. But my daughter's not in mainstream school no more. But the difference is where I went to pick her up. I had to speak to one of the police officers, not in uniform, and I moved away, and they asked questions. I explained that she's autistic ADHD. They said, okay. She wouldn't talk, but they managed to get my number because she gave the sister's number. But when I got there now, she had a hood on. So she fit the criteria of probably a child that's going to be probably doing county line. You understand? Black child, underage. But when I spoke to the police, they were very helpful. So when you always hear everybody say, talk negative about the police, the story of my daughter is that the police just turned and said that what was quite strange is said that we've got your daughter here. What does she look like? She was tiptoeing. Now, I was trying to imagine my daughter tiptoeing because usually she likes to wear her sliders. This time she had her Nikes on. And so in the end, I didn't say nothing. I went, okay. I said, that's part of her autism. But, people say, what you're talking about is part of autism. But I'm not saying nothing. So we went, she held my arm and she said, Mom, what is the problem? Why are they asking me too much questions? I said, because you're in school hour. Because even though we're in COVID, you still shouldn't be going out. She had a face mask on, but her thing was she wanted to go to Oxford. Now, anybody who knows about Oxford or any of these areas, when you talk about county line, now in my head, all I thought about, if my daughter did get on that train and she never came back home, I don't even know how I would have felt. So there's any parent out there, when somebody, you're a neurotypical parent saying, or anybody says, your child knows what they're doing. My daughter knows everything you can know about healthy relationships or county line because of the work that I do, because I do stuff with, Paul McKenzie. So it's not that my children don't know, but when a child has got autism or ADHD or PDA or ODD, though nobody doesn't want these labels, when your child is at that 1 second of a time and somebody can take advantage of your child, Your child would end up at the other side of England innocently, but we don't know the type of person that will get hold of your child. So for me, I could have that conversation with my daughter. I spoke to the school, I spoke to the social services, I took responsibility. So I'm letting people know that I don't encourage my children to do things. But when I hear people telling me I've allowed my children to do things or I allowed my daughter to get pregnant, no. It's when society tells us that autistic people get it, not all the time. And as you said, you can have an autistic person who's nonverbal, but they still could hold down a job. And they could have an age of an older person. Then you have an autistic person who's nonverbal, but they've got a mind of a 4-year-old. But people seem to think that they can seem to just say about autistic people, not realizing you're endangering that child because you refuse to help the parent and the autistic child when they're in primary school. So when I look at my daughter and I'm saying it, and I'm not putting my dirty linen in public, it's to show you that as a Black mother, I'm fearful when it comes to knife crime. I'm fearful when it comes to exploitation, county lines, stop and search, because I've seen what has happened to Black families, but I've seen it happen to white families too. But when it is because of the color of your skin, because you stand out, more chance that my daughter got stopped and the police dealt with her accordingly because she was tiptoeing. Now, does it make sense? So it shows, I will go back to the police station and thank them, because at the end of the day, I'm in thought, I'm in process, I'm still processing what happens, because I could have had another horror. With my children, I get horror stories and I use it as a way to educate. And I think in the community, we need to start opening our mouths and to pick up the phone, and we need to start talking to people who are going to listen. If social services, the police, CAMS, the local GP, hospitals are not listening, even the people referral units and the NEETs. Is it not in education? I forgot the way it is, education, I can't remember none of it. But I think that we just need to start, is it not education, employment, training, I believe, is something like NEET?
Yeah, yeah.
So I just feel that I just think my advice to anybody right now in COVID, and when COVID gets national lockdown does loosen the restrictions, is please, if that child is exhibiting negative behaviours it is probably because of all the changes, and we have to start showing a bit more love, understanding, and stop making assumptions. Because as I said, my daughter may have got on that train and there may have been a different story. So yeah, that's my advice, to show how naive our children can be. But when they got autism and society says they understand, it's the consequences of how they're going to deal with it if the support is not put there. So that's my thing. I have to leave with you, Max, when we talk about how society can not be cruel to autistic people, let alone the families.
I think that's, yeah. I mean, thank you for just being honest and open and telling us your story as well. I've always wanted to do this interview because yes, it's a second voice, but also most importantly, it's your voice as well. And as I say, you do work hard, and I'm just happy that I've got your.
You got me. I was
So
trying to run away, wasn't I?
you were. No, but thank you for your time as well, Vanessa.
No, it's okay. I'm just thanking you for asking me, and I'm just thanking you that you never gave up, because I know that time in the heckle, it wasn't a nice, that was your first time, but for me, it was just lovely, because as I said, you were quite young, and again, and because you're quite tall, people assume, and that's another thing, you're quite tall, but at the end of the day, people need to just be more respectful and take time to listen and not assume. If an autistic person is not giving eye contact, or even if they're giving eye contact, doesn't mean that they're not autistic. People just got to be very careful, not assessing something when you don't understand. But thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for asking.
No, thank you.